A question has been following you, not in your mind, in your spirit. Why has every relationship that looked promising ended just before it became real? Why did people come close enough to awaken your hope only to leave you carrying questions that never received answers? What if those endings were not random? What if they were interruptions, not failures? Because there is something you need to hear before the next person walks into your life. If you miss this, you may mistake a divine answer for an ordinary encounter. Or worse, you may push away the very relationship you have prayed for because it does not arrive the way you expected. There is one warning that keeps appearing throughout Scripture whenever God prepares someone for a new season. Most people notice the promise, very few pay attention to the warning that comes before it. That is why so many people pray for what God is sending, yet fail to recognize it when it finally arrives. Before we go any further, if you feel this message reached you at exactly the right moment, write the word "ready" in the comments. Not because the comment changes God's timing, but because sometimes a simple act of agreement reminds your own heart to stay awake. Now listen carefully. The warning is not about fear. It is about preparation. There is a difference. Isaiah 43:19 says, "See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it?" Notice the question. Do you not perceive it? God did not ask if the new thing existed. He asked whether his people could recognize it. That changes everything, because a blessing can arrive and still be overlooked. A door can open and still remain unopened. A relationship can be heaven sent, yet be rejected because it looks unfamiliar. That is the tension many believers never think about. You have spent so much time asking God to send the right person, but have you asked Him to prepare your eyes to recognize them? Those are two different prayers. One asks for arrival, the other asks for discernment. And discernment has become more important than ever, because not every connection deserves your trust, yet not every unexpected connection deserves your suspicion either. Some people have been hurt so deeply that every act of kindness feels suspicious. Others have become so lonely that every bit of attention feels like confirmation. Both are dangerous. God never intended His children to live controlled by fear. Neither did He intend them to be controlled by desperation. He leads with peace. That peace does not remove wisdom, it strengthens it. There is another reason this warning matters. Many people assume a new relationship begins the moment two people meet. Scripture often reveals something different. God usually begins preparing hearts long before He introduces people. Think about that. While you were praying, healing, crying, questioning, wondering why nothing seemed to move, God may have been working in another life at the very same time. You could have been living two completely different stories, yet heaven was quietly guiding both paths toward an appointed moment. That thought should humble every anxious heart, because timing belongs to God. Proverbs 3:5-6 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your path straight." Notice what the verse does not say. It does not promise that you will understand every delay. It promises that God knows the path even when you do not. And perhaps that is exactly where you are today. You understand your prayers, you do not understand the silence. You understand your desire, you do not understand the waiting. You understand your faith, you do not understand why everyone else seems to be moving ahead while your own story feels paused. But what if the pause has been protecting something you cannot yet see? There is a pattern throughout Scripture. God often protects what He intends to preserve. Joseph experienced years of waiting before purpose unfolded. David was anointed long before he was crowned. Waiting never meant abandonment. Sometimes waiting meant preparation. But here is where today's warning becomes deeply personal. Preparation is not only about becoming the right person, it's also about letting go of the version of love that was built from disappointment instead of truth. That can be difficult because disappointment quietly teaches lessons. It teaches you to expect rejection. It teaches you to lower expectations. It teaches you to hide parts of your heart. Eventually, those lessons become walls. The frightening part is that walls don't only keep pain out. Sometimes they keep genuine love out too. Could that be the warning God wanted you to hear? Not that someone is coming, but that you must be careful not to greet them with yesterday's wounds instead of today's healing. Romans 12 verse 2 says, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." Transformation begins inside, before relationships change, before circumstances change, before visible answers appear. The heart begins changing first. And I believe that's where this message is leading, because there is one specific sign that often appears before God introduces a relationship that carries His peace. Most people completely overlook it. When they finally recognize what it meant, they realized heaven had been whispering long before the relationship arrived. That sign is not what most people expect, and understanding it could completely change the way you see the season you are living in right now. Before we uncover it, I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt that God was protecting you from a relationship you only understood much later? Share your experience in the comments. Someone reading your story may find the encouragement they have been praying for today. The next part reveals why this hidden sign matters more than the relationship itself. And once you see it, you may never look at your waiting season the same way again. The hidden sign is rarely dramatic. It does not always arrive with dreams. It does not always come through a prophecy. Sometimes it begins with a quiet change inside you that you almost ignore. You suddenly stop chasing what once consumed you. The need to force connections begins to fade. You become less interested in proving your worth and more interested in protecting your peace. That is not emotional weakness. That is spiritual maturity. Many people mistake this season for loneliness, but often it's God clearing the noise from your heart so you can recognize the voice that truly matters. Jesus said in John 10:27, "My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me." Notice the order. Hearing comes before following. God teaches you to recognize His voice before He asks you to follow Him into something new. That includes relationships. Because if you can't recognize His direction, every attractive opportunity begins to look like an answered prayer. And that's exactly where many sincere believers become confused. Not because they stopped loving God, but because they became impatient with His timing. Impatience has a quiet way of changing our standards. What once felt like a clear boundary begins to feel negotiable. What once seemed like an obvious warning begins to look like a small compromise. Little by little, loneliness starts speaking louder than wisdom. That's why today's warning matters so much. The enemy does not always try to convince you that God's promise is impossible. Sometimes he simply tries to convince you to settle before the promise arrives. The difference may only be a few months or a single decision, but those moments can shape years of your future. Psalm 37 verse 7 says, "Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for Him." Patience is active trust. It's choosing not to grab what God has not released, even when your emotions tell you otherwise. Now let me ask you something that deserves an honest answer. Have you ever felt that God was protecting you from a relationship you only understood much later? Share your experience in the comments. Someone reading your story may find the encouragement they have been praying for today. The next part reveals why this hidden sign matters more than the relationship itself. And once you see it, you may never look at your waiting season the same way again. The hidden sign is rarely dramatic. It does not always arrive with dreams. It does not always come through a prophecy. Sometimes it begins with a quiet change inside you that you almost ignore. You suddenly stop chasing what once consumed you. The need to force connections begins to fade. You become less interested in proving your worth and more interested in protecting your peace. That is not emotional weakness. That is spiritual maturity. Many people mistake this season for loneliness, but often it's God clearing the noise from your heart so you can recognize the voice that truly matters. Jesus said in John 10:27, "My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me." Notice the order. Hearing comes before following. God teaches you to recognize His voice before He asks you to follow Him into something new. That includes